Welcome back to the Deep Dive, and happy Halloween, everyone. You know how this works. You send us the sources, and we jump right in. And for tonight's Halloween special, we're taking a look at a real-life Cold War mystery, the Dyatlov Pass Incident.
It's a case that's fascinated people for over 60 years, and it's all thanks to the sheer number of unanswered questions. Every time you think you're getting close to an answer, another question pops up and keeps the mystery alive.
Right. So to start us off, let's set the scene. It's 1959, the heart of the Soviet Union. A group of 10 experienced student hikers are about to set off on a pretty challenging trek through the Ural Mountains.
Okay.
Led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov.
Yeah, and I think it's important to highlight their experience. These weren't just casual hikers, they were skilled and seasoned adventurers, familiar with the terrain and all the challenges that come with winter expeditions.
That's a great point, which makes the events that unfolded even more baffling. Weeks go by with no word from the group. Radio silence. Eventually, a search party is sent out, and what they find is like something straight out of a nightmare.
Absolutely. So they eventually find the hiker's tent, abandoned on a slope and partially buried in the snow. But here's the strange part. It had been slashed open from the inside.
Okay, so now I'm getting chills. Why would a group of experienced hikers facing some kind of crisis cut their way out of a tent in the middle of a freezing night? That doesn't make any sense.
Right, and inside their belongings were scattered everywhere, food was laid out. It's like they left in a sudden and totally unexplained panic.
Oh, so this discovery really sets the stage for a mystery that only gets deeper.
Oh, it gets a lot deeper.
Because next, the search party finds 5 bodies scattered across the snow, some of them hundreds of yards away from the tent.
Hundreds of yards.
And that's when things get really strange. They're in different states of undress, and some of them have these bizarre injuries, burns on their bodies, and even what look like bite marks on their own hands.
Yeah, so the initial assumption was hypothermia, which can actually lead to a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, where people in extreme cold will actually start to take their clothes off.
Hold on, really? People take their clothes off when they're freezing?
It sounds crazy, but it's a real thing. It's thought to be caused by a malfunction in the body's temperature regulation. As hypothermia sets in, the blood vessels near the skin constrict to try and conserve heat, and this can lead to a false sensation of warmth, causing the person to feel like they're overheating, so they start shedding clothes.
Wow. That's fascinating and terrifying at the same time. But even with that explanation, some of the injuries just don't add up, like those bite marks on their hands. What's the explanation for that?
Yeah, you're right. There are a lot of details that don't fit neatly into that hypothermia theory. And unfortunately, as the investigation continued, more and more questions just kept popping up, especially when spring arrived and the snow began to melt.
Oh no, this is where it gets even creepier, right?
You could say that.
What did they find?
Well, when the snow melted, they discovered 4 more bodies, hidden deeper in a gully.
Oh, wow.
And the injuries on these bodies were even more disturbing.
Like what? What kind of injuries are we talking about?
Crushed chests, fractured skulls, and some were even missing eyes and tongues.
Missing eyes and tongues, that's horrifying. Those injuries definitely point to some kind of intense force or trauma, way beyond what you'd normally associate with hypothermia.
Exactly.
So what did the Soviet authorities say about all of this?
Well, the official investigation concluded that the hikers had died from a quote-unquote compelling natural force.
Compelling natural force. That's incredibly vague. I mean, what kind of natural force could inflict those kinds of injuries? Almost like they were trying to hide something.
Well, their lack of transparency definitely fueled decades of speculation and conspiracy theories.
Oh, I bet. What are some of the most popular theories out there?
Well, some people suggest paranormal encounters, like maybe they ran into a Yeti or some other unknown creature, while others point to possible Cold War intrigue, like maybe the KGB or the CIA were involved, or even secret military experiments gone wrong.
Wait, hold on. Secret military experiments, is there any evidence to support that theory?
Well, it does get interesting here. Traces of radiation were found on some of the hikers' clothing, and this has fueled speculation that there might be a connection to the Kishtin nuclear disaster, which happened a few years earlier.
So they found radiation. Could they have stumbled into a secret testing zone or something? This is starting to sound like a Cold War spy thriller.
It does, doesn't it? But it's important to remember that correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because they had radiation on their clothing doesn't automatically mean it was the cause of death.
That's a really good point. It's easy to get carried away with those more outlandish theories. But we need to stick to the facts. So the case went cold for decades. But then in 2019, it was suddenly reopened. What prompted the Russian government to take another look? at the Dyatlov Pass Incident.
Yeah.
After all these years.
Well, this new investigation took a totally different approach. They focus on a much more plausible explanation, a slab avalanche.
A slab avalanche. I've heard of avalanches.
Mm-hmm.
But what makes a slab avalanche different? And how could that explain what happened to these hikers?
Okay, so imagine like a big, cohesive layer of snow, almost like a giant slab just sitting on top of a weaker layer of snow. And then certain factors can trigger this slab to break off, like wind or temperature changes, or even the weight of skiers or hikers. And then this slab breaks off and it just thunders down the slope with incredible force.
So instead of like a loose, powdery avalanche, it's like a solid wall of snow crashing down. Yeah, that sounds absolutely terrifying. But how does that explain the hikers fleeing their tent and all of those horrible injuries?
Well, the theory is that a slab avalanche could have struck the hikers' tent directly, and that would explain why they found it damaged, and why the hikers might have slashed their way out in a panic. Imagine you're asleep in your tent in the middle of the night, and suddenly this immense force just slams into you. You're going to do whatever it takes to get out of there.
Yeah, I can see that. They must have been so disoriented and terrified.
Exactly. It's a fight-or-flight response.
But what about the injuries?
Well, a slab avalanche can cause some serious damage. Enough force to crush bones, cause internal bleeding, and that could explain the head trauma found on some of the victims.
Okay, I can see that. But what about the missing eyes and tongues?
It's possible that those could be attributed to scavenging animals after the hikers had already died from their other injuries.
So it's a plausible scenario.
Yeah.
But are there any weaknesses to this theory? I mean, some of those injuries were absolutely horrific. Could a slab avalanche really cause that much damage?
You're right to question it. While the slab avalanche theory is pretty compelling, it doesn't perfectly account for every single detail. Some researchers have argued that a slab avalanche, even though it's incredibly powerful, might not be enough to cause that specific level of trauma.
And what about the location of the bodies? Some of them were found pretty far from the tent. Could a slab avalanche really have carried them that far?
That's a good question. And to try and test this theory, Swiss researchers actually created a mathematical model. They factored in things like the slope angle, the estimated weight of that snow slab, and the potential impact on the tent. And their findings suggested that a slab avalanche was definitely plausible in that location, and it could have generated enough force to cause significant injuries.
So the science seems to back up the theory to a certain extent, but there are still some unanswered questions. It's like we need a few more pieces of the puzzle to fully understand what happened that night.
And that's what keeps this case so intriguing. This back and forth between the scientific evidence and the unanswered questions. We might have a pretty solid theory, but the mystery is still there.
Absolutely. It's a mystery that just won't go away. You know, speaking of mysteries, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the cultural impact of the Dyatlov Pass incident. This case has captured the public imagination for decades. It's inspired books and documentaries and even video games. Why do you think this case continues to resonate with people so strongly?
I think it's a few things. First, there's just the inherent mystery of it all. As humans, we're naturally drawn to the unknown, to those puzzles that defy simple explanations. And the Dyatlov Pass incident is a perfect example of that. It's a chilling enigma, with circumstances so bizarre and unsettling that we just have to try and find answers, even if those answers may never come.
It's like a real-life horror story, unfolding in one of the most remote and unforgiving environments imaginable.
Exactly. That sense of isolation and vulnerability just adds another layer to the whole thing. It's not hard to imagine yourself in the hiker's shoes, facing the unknown in that vast and unforgiving wilderness.
Yeah, it's a chilling thought. And then there's also the historical context. This happened during the Cold War, a time of so much paranoia and secrecy and suspicion. So it's easy to see how those factors could fuel all these conspiracy theories.
Absolutely. That lack of transparency from the Soviet authorities, combined with the strange details of the case, it created the perfect breeding ground for all sorts of wild theories to pop up.
And those theories continue to this day.
Right. Even with the scientific evidence pointing towards the avalanche theory, there are still people who prefer those more outlandish explanations. They see government conspiracies or paranormal activity behind every detail.
I guess it's just human nature. When we're faced with the unknown, we want to try and fill in those gaps, even if it means venturing into the world of speculation.
We're always trying to find patterns and connections, even when they might not be there.
I see what you mean. So the Dyatlov Pass incident really offers a fascinating glimpse into how our minds work.
Exactly. It shows what happens when we're confronted with the unexplained.
We crave answers. We desperately search for explanations, and sometimes those explanations lead us down some very interesting paths.
Some more credible than others.
So where does that leave us? We have this plausible explanation with the slab avalanche, but we still have some doubts and some details that just don't quite fit. Do you think we'll ever definitively solve the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass incident? Or is it destined to remain an enigma, forever shrouded in speculation and unanswered questions?
Yeah, it really does feel like we have this giant puzzle and we're missing a few key pieces. Like we can see the general outline, but those finer details are still so blurry.
And I think that's part of the beauty of this whole case. Some mysteries are meant to stay with us. They challenge us and remind us that there are things we may never fully understand.
Especially on a night like Halloween, when that line between what we know and what we don't know feels so thin, it really makes you wonder what else is out there.
Right.
Lurking in the shadows, just waiting to be discovered.
And you know, the Dyatlov Pass incident is a reminder that even with all of our technology and scientific advancements, there are still forces of nature that can just overwhelm us. Mysteries that we can't explain. And stories that stay with us long after they've happened. It's a bit of a sobering thought.
Yeah.
Especially on Halloween. But I have to admit, there's something so alluring about these unsolved mysteries.
Oh, absolutely.
They really spark our curiosity. And they make us think critically and explore the boundaries of what we think we know.
I agree. It's like this reminder that the world is far more complex and mysterious than we often give it credit for.
And that's what I love about these deep dives. We get to peel back those layers of a mystery and examine the evidence, explore all the different possibilities, even if we never get a definitive answer.
Exactly. It's all about that journey, that exploration and discovery.
Right.
Who knows, maybe someday, someone will find that one piece of evidence, that missing link, that finally solves the Dyatlov Pass incident. But until then, the mystery continues.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the chilling mystery of the Dyatlov Pass incident. We hope you enjoyed this special Halloween episode of The Deep Dive. Don't forget to follow and subscribe for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics, from history to science and everything in between. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and maybe keep a flashlight handy. You never know what you might find lurking in the shadows.